Rain used to be a blessing. It made the fields bloom and the rivers swell, bringing abundant life to the cities that dotted the coastline. Back then, seagulls soared and screeched over fishing boats that bustled with the day's haul. Seawater shimmered turquoise under the rising sun, and children would play in the shallows without fear. No one ever suspected the ocean's hidden rage deep below its shimmering surface. When the undersea volcanoes started erupting, nobody paid much mind at first. Science journals published warnings that oceanic vents were growing more active, that some tectonic shift was unsettling the planet's crust. The news traveled but was largely dismissed. Who would believe that ancient undersea columns of magma could pose an immediate threat to coastal life, even when a few dead fish washed up on beaches or a rare plume of steam drifted ominously across the waves? The majority of scientists and politicians alike called it an anomaly, something that would pass in time. Then the small quakes began rattling the coastal cities. At first, the tremors felt like an unsettling reminder. The earth is not as stable as we like to believe. Houses shook and plates clattered, but no severe damage occurred. Days later, the ground heaved in violent convulsions and tall buildings collapsed into rubble. Along the shore, people sprinted for higher ground as toxic clouds of steam and ash wafted inland. The fish that had once been a primary food source in the region died in mass numbers. Their corpses floated in the shallows, polluting the water with toxins, until the waves hurled them onto beaches in rotting heaps. The stench was insufferable. Yet that was only the beginning. Those who ventured near the water developed strange lesions and breathing problems. Rumor spread that the sea itself had turned poisonous, the waves too close to the volcanic cracks beneath. Soon the toxins became airborne, traveling on the sea breeze. Crops along the coastal plains withered in mere days. Storm clouds gathered the toxic air and carried it inland. Rains that were once a blessing now struck fear into every heart, for the droplets burned skin and destroyed farmland. People scrambled to build protective domes or filter systems, but it all happened too quickly. Nations collapsed, supply lines disappeared, and panic spread across the world even faster than the contamination. For those with the means, the answer was to seal themselves away from the poison. They built towers rising high above the ground, fortified with reinforced steel walls. Populations consolidated in these final towers, each designed to be a self-contained ecosystem. Air filtration, hydroponic gardens, sealed water supplies, and advanced recycling to ensure no resource was wasted. Their walls were thick enough to repel storms, but no one was naive enough to believe they could stay locked in forever without replenishing supplies. The question was never if the towers would fail, but when. Inside one such structure, a squat spiral design overlooking a shattered series of beaches, lived a community of 300 men, women, and children. The tower had no official name. Nicknames came and went. Spiral Haven, The Shell, Lighthouse Bastion. To those who called it home, it was simply our tower. The external windows were of triple reinforced glass. Down below, the swirling tides were a sickly green-gray, occasionally bubbling with pockets of volcanic gas that rose from the fissures in the seabed. A constant hum reverberated through the building as air filtration systems fought to keep the inside atmosphere safe. Young and old lived in the tower's belly, where the old storage levels had been converted into communal housing. On the mid-levels, engineers tended to the battery rooms, the turbine motors, and the advanced ventilation. Above them, at the very top, was a greenhouse brimming with vegetables, fruits, and algae tanks, each monitored around the clock by horticultural specialists. The population was tight-knit, but as resources began to dwindle and the filtration machinery aged, tensions soared. The taboo subject that no one wanted to address was how long their tower could continue to keep them alive. Everyone understood that if the air system stopped working, or if a single quake caused structural damage, the entire building could become a tomb. Within the tower, a man named Talon filled a unique position as an explorer. Explorers were those equipped with suits and rebreathers, capable of withstanding short journeys outside, at least when the toxins were at their mildest levels. It was not a job any parent wished upon their child, but it was an absolute necessity. Once a month, and sometimes more frequently if the tower needed a particular part, an explorer team would have to make a trek across the broken landscape, searching for salvage from the dead cities or for anything that could be repurposed into fresh building materials. Talon had once worked as a fisherman, back when the seas were still only rumored to be dangerous. He believed in the ocean. He used to say it was Earth's lifeblood, and that it would survive any crisis, adapt to whatever the planet threw at it. But when the deep cracks unfurled and the sea became laced with toxins, his faith in the ocean didn't protect him from losing everything he once knew. He'd escaped inland with a handful of fellow fishermen, only to realize that the inland regions were being consumed by the same poison. Eventually, they found their way to the tower and reinvented themselves as survivors, not fishermen, and forged new identities in the shadow of this last refuge. On this particular day, Talon awaited word about the upcoming expedition in the tower's command center. Thin cables coiled across the ceiling, displaying a flickering green glow of operational statuses. A large holographic map of the tower and its surrounding landmass hovered in the center of the room, bright dotted lines showing potential routes. A group of older men and women stood around the map, discussing strategy. It was a tense gathering. People waited for the news to travel through the tower. Supplies were low, meaning the next trip outside couldn't be delayed any longer. Precious filters were wearing out, and the greenhouse needed specialized bulbs that had burned out weeks ago, bulbs they hoped to retrieve from an abandoned facility in the remains of a nearby city. The tower's leader, a woman named Dr. Eliana Ward, nodded slowly and glanced at Talon. "We need you and your team to leave at first light," she said. "Check the environmental monitors. If the volcanic emissions are even slightly down, that's your best window." Talon shifted his weight. "We'll be ready. I just hope you're right and that facility isn't picked clean by scavengers." A grim expression flickered across Eliana's face. "I'm more worried about it being submerged. The last satellite feed we had indicated that the ocean has swallowed large chunks of the old industrial zones." She paused. "But we don't have a choice. The greenhouse is dying. If we don't get new bulbs, and soon, our next harvest might fail. Then all of this is for nothing." Despite the oppressive atmosphere, Talon gave a reassuring nod. "We'll find something. We always do." With that, he took his leave, his boots clacking lightly against the grated floor as he wound his way down the spiral ramp to the explorer's workshop. The workshop was a large open space, reminiscent of an old garage. Rows of metal counters were strewn with half-disassembled breathing units, tools, leftover scraps, oxygen cylinders, some patched with duct tape, lined the walls. As he entered, Talon spotted 3 familiar faces. Halen, a sharp-witted mechanic who was the best at patching suits on the fly, Jonah, a broad-shouldered man with a remarkable sense of direction, and Rena, the youngest among them, a 19-year-old who had insisted on joining the team after her father died in a supply run. She was small of frame but fiercely determined. Each of them wore the standard explorer's gear, a pressurized suit with segmented plating, protective goggles, rebreather face masks. Halen glanced up from a half-finished oxygen tank. "I heard tomorrow's the day?" "It has to be," Talon replied, checking the age on a suit seal. "We can't wait. Greenhouse needs bulbs, the tower needs new filtration parts. I'm not sure how much we can carry, but we have to try." Jonah gave a small grunt. "We'll manage. We just need to watch the wind patterns. That last storm nearly took my mask off." Rena flexed her fingers, clearly skittish but trying to mask it with confidence. "Are we going inland again, or closer to the coast?" "Inland," Talon said. "Not far, but the area is compromised by floods and pockets of gas. We'll rely on the route that's marked on the map. Let's get our suits tested and the vehicles ready. And everyone, be sure to rest tonight." Despite Talon's calm directives, a tension coiled in his gut. Every explorer trip put lives at risk. He'd lost teammates before to sudden gas plumes or quakes that tore open the ground beneath them. Yet he also understood that if no one ventured out, the tower's resources dwindled, leaving everyone doomed to suffocate or starve. Their willingness to risk the outside world was the only thing standing between survival and extinction. That evening, the tower pulsed with subdued anxiety. Families shared quiet meals of algae bread and dried hydroponic vegetables. A hush filled the air whenever someone stepped into the communal spaces. Almost everyone who passed by Talon offered a nod or softly spoken prayer, hoping for a safe return. Even those who were once stoic found themselves murmuring goodbyes. It was a universal truth within these steel walls. When the explorers went out, they might not come back. The next morning arrived with alarms that buzzed through the tower's corridors. Talon slipped into his pressurized suit, fastening each clamp and seal that would hold out the toxic air. Through the reinforced glass observation deck, he stared at the swirling green horizon. It was difficult to see when day began and night ended because the sun fought to pierce the thick haze. A pale, sickly light glowed over the horizon. That was enough to indicate the start of a new day. The tower's main gates slid open. A hiss of equalizing pressure preceded the rush of outside air that seeped into the small chamber. Talon checked each teammate's rebreather. "Talon check?" Jonah gave a thumbs up. Halen nodded, her voice crackling over the radio. "All good here." Rena tested her oxygen feed, and the hiss of the valves sounded crisp. Once certain everything functioned, they stepped out into the gritty world. The strange silence outside enveloped them, broken only by howling winds that carried the stench of sulfur. The ground was a cracked mosaic, its once fertile soil dried and powdered. They had 2 all-terrain vehicles, squat, 6-wheeled transports with sealed cabins. Driving through the haze, they had to rely on instruments that mapped topography beneath layers of dust. The sky, a swirling greenish-brown canvas, hung overhead like a malevolent presence. They trundled across broken roads for miles. Occasionally, they came upon the remains of small towns. Twisted metal, rusted vehicles, hollowed-out buildings. Talon caught glimpses of collapsed structures, swallowed by stirring sands. In the distance, the dull roar of the ocean was an ever-present threat, as if reminding them of the unstoppable power lurking just over the horizon. After 2 hours of careful driving, they reached the outskirts of an industrial district that had once hummed with factories. Rusted towers dotted the land, many collapsed or half submerged. Their coordinates pointed to a particular building that used to manufacture various types of specialized bulbs and filament tubes. That building, ironically, was near the water's edge, though the sea had since advanced far inland. Rena peered through the sealed window of her vehicle. "It looks partially flooded." Halen took a reading of the area. "Radiation from the volcanic activity is mild enough. Toxins are moderate. It's not good, but it's not at lethal levels yet." Talon signaled for them to stop. They parked the transports near a cluster of rubble that would offer some shelter from the wind. Outside, the reek of rotten algae and sulfur hung thick. They had no choice but to venture inside on foot. With a small crowbar, Talon pried open what remained of the facility's steel door. An ominous groan echoed as he pushed it aside, revealing a hallway strewn with debris and shallow water. The fluid lapped at their boots. Jonah moved ahead, gun raised in case of unexpected animal life or other survivors. Though most wildlife had died off or mutated, desperate scavengers still roamed. Their footsteps splashed with every step deeper into the structure. Broken windows let in a dull, toxic glow. Sheets of algae-like residue clung to the concrete walls, and the air was stale. A battered sign overhead identified the corridor leading to a storage chamber for specialized lighting equipment. Talon signaled for them to move carefully, scanning for structural damage. The deeper they walked, the more water they encountered. Soon it rose to Talon's thighs. "We won't last long if the level rises further," said Rena, her voice trembling slightly. "Should we turn back and check another route?" Talon glanced at the building's layout on his wrist display. "Storage is just ahead. If it's not too deep, we might be able to grab something quickly." They pressed on, sloshing through the corridor until they reached a large door labeled "Storages." Jonah bent down, fiddling with the old control panel. The electronic lock was long dead, so he used a manual override. The door slid open with a creak, revealing a vast chamber cluttered with crates, toppled shelves, and standing water. If there was anything salvageable, it might be here, provided it wasn't destroyed by flood or rust. Halen carefully searched the shelves, using a portable light to pierce the dimness. Rows of dusty boxes lined the corners. Some had collapsed, spilling their contents into the water. With practiced efficiency, Jonah pried open box after box, searching for the bulbs they desperately needed. Rena rummaged where sunlight streamed through a cracked ceiling, wiping layers of grime away in hopes of revealing a hidden trove. Time crawled. Every few minutes a tremor shook the walls, sending small ripples across the water's surface. Bill clutched his flashlight, scanning the room. "We have to move faster," he urged. The overhead beams let out an unsettling groan. Finally Helen's voice came over the comm, excited and hushed. "I found a crate labeled bulb filaments A1 dusty, but sealed. It looks intact." Jonah nearly slipped in his haste to check. He ran a scanner along the crate. No major water damage. This could be it. They quickly lifted the crate. It was heavier than expected, but the sealed packaging inside appeared to be unbroken. A surge of hope raced through Talon. They just might have what they needed to keep the greenhouse afloat a while longer. He signaled to head out, carefully making their way back through the flooded corridors. As they reached the building's entrance, a deep rumble emanated through the ground, followed by a roar that shook the walls. Talon and the others exchanged alarmed looks. The Undersea volcano, or one of its fissures, must have erupted again, stirring the unstable earth. Concrete chunks rained from above, and the facility's foundation groaned in response. "Move!" Talon shouted. They raced down the corridor, water splashing up around them. Rena clutched the crate to her chest, her breath hitching with exertion. Shards of ceiling crashed around them, dust clouding the hallway. Jonah shielded her from debris with his own body. Another violent rumble buckled the floor, sending Talon stumbling. He grabbed a broken railing to steady himself. Pushing forward, they emerged from the building just in time to see the ground splitting in the distance, releasing a geyser of steaming greenish gas. The sea roiled in the background, churning with unnatural fervor. Talon waved them toward the vehicle. "Go, go!" They piled into the transports, sealing the doors behind them. Rena managed to keep the crate safe, clutching it for dear life. Jonah revved the engine, accelerating away from the collapsing structure. In seconds, it was a blur behind them, swallowed by rubble. The vehicles rumbled across the shattered roads. Through the windshield, the horizon blurred with swirling clouds of ash and steam. A fresh wave of volcanic discharge had turned the air even more toxic than before. As they sped back, each minute felt like a test of endurance. Alarms beeped on the control panels, indicating that external toxicity levels were spiking. Talon's heart pounded. If the tower's environment had been similarly affected, they might be returning to a compromised stronghold. He banished the thought for now. There was nothing to do but push forward. Miles churned beneath the transport's tires. It was only once they reached a familiar ridge that they caught sight of the tower's rising silhouette. Cloaked in dusty haze, its steel walls gleamed faintly. A jolt of relief coursed through Talon. "We're almost there. Let's hope they can open the gates quickly." As it turned out, a partial quake had shaken the tower's foundations as well, but it still stood. Guards in protective suits signaled from a watch platform, guiding the explorers to the entrance. The gate slid open just enough to admit the vehicles. Once inside, a second set of doors sealed off the outside world. The decontamination cycle kicked in, showering the vehicles with a chemical mist designed to neutralize surface toxins. Only after that did the inner airlock open, allowing them to exit. A crowd had gathered near the bay, including Dr. Eliana Ward. Eyes widened at the precious crate in Rena's arms. "You found them?" Eliana asked, her voice hushed with hope. Rena nodded, her voice trembling. "They're sealed. Should be usable, we hope." Spontaneous cheers spread through the onlookers. It was a small victory, but in a world where survival was measured in days, such a victory meant everything. The bulbs would ensure the greenhouse survived a while longer, perhaps buying more time to find a permanent solution, or at least preventing immediate chaos. As the explorers removed their suits, they felt the ache of battered muscles and the weight of near disaster. While the tower's staff whisked the crate away for inspection, Talon sank onto a nearby bench, letting out a long breath. Ileana crouched beside him. "Thank you," she said, softly. "All of you." Halen, peeling off a damp glove, nodded weakly. We just do what we must." Jonah drank from a water bottle and wiped sweat from his brow. What's the situation here? Everything seems stable? Eliana's gaze flicked toward the corridor that led down to the engineering levels. We had a rough quake, a few minor injuries, a cracked wall in one of the lower sectors. The filtration system is still operational, but we're using backup power at the moment. I won't lie, it's getting harder to keep up with each new disaster. They fell silent. Everyone understood the precarious balance they lived in. Another big quake, another catastrophic eruption, and even the tower's thick walls might not be enough. But at least for now they had the bulbs and a chance to continue their tenuous existence. That evening, the tower held a subdued celebration in the dining hall. The walls hummed with electricity, the lights flickering occasionally, but it was enough to illuminate the smiling faces. People passed around meager portions of vegetable stew and algae biscuits. In one corner, children listened wide-eyed as a teacher told them a heavily sanitized version of the explorer's bravery. To them, the outside world was a terrifying unknown, filled with monsters and gas plumes. Talon sat near Jonah, Halen, and Renna, who clutched a mug of water, her expression still dazed from the day's events. She stared at the steam rising from the cup. "It's surreal," she said. "I used to think that one day we'd all find a way to fix this, but the more I see, the more it feels like there's nothing left to fix." Halen didn't reply. She'd always been pragmatic. Talon placed a hand gently on Renna's shoulder. "What we do out there matters," he said. "Maybe it's a long shot, but we keep hope alive by coming back with supplies, by showing people that we can adapt." Renna nodded, but her eyes still held a haunted look. Jonah changed the subject gently. "At least the greenhouse will be back up to full function soon. We might even expand if the bulbs are compatible with another rig. That'll mean more food to go around." A wave of quiet optimism rippled through them. Small comforts could be the difference between despair and faith in a future worth living. They had survived another day. The horizon of tomorrow remained uncertain, but no one was ready to give up. Later that night, Talon found himself unable to sleep. He wandered up to the tower's top level, where a small observation chamber offered a panoramic view through reinforced glass. The world outside was a dark blur of swirling toxins and dim starlight. Strange lights occasionally flickered in the distance, perhaps pockets of volcanic fire or reflections off noxious clouds. Pangs of longing filled his chest as he remembered the quiet brilliance of moonlit waves before the seas turned poisonous. Eliana entered, her footfalls soft against the grated floor. She stood beside him, peering into the swirling void. "Beautiful in a tragic way, isn't it?" she said. "The planet is changing, violently shaping itself into something new, and we're clinging to old scraps of an existence that might never return." "When I was a fisherman," Talon replied, "I used to love storms, the energy, the promise of renewal. Now I look at the sky and it's just malevolent." She nodded quietly. "We've received some signals from another tower across the bay. They tell us they've sealed their upper levels and are rationing oxygen. They've lost half their population in the last 6 months. That could be us soon enough." Talon balled his fists. "We need to do more than survive. We need, I don't know, to find a bigger plan, something beyond these towers. Or else we'll just fade away." Eliana listened, her expression thoughtful. "It's a risk, but I've been working on an idea. A small group might attempt to venture far inland, past the known volcanically active zones, to see if there's an area less affected. If such a place exists, we could relocate, build anew. That's a massive gamble." "Everything nowadays is a gamble," she said, her gaze never leaving the dark horizon. "But we can't stay here forever. The equipment is old, infrastructure failing. We'll have more quakes, more eruptions. Sooner or later we'll run out of filters, run out of ways to patch the walls. We need to seek a future beyond the final towers." He considered her words, feeling both trepidation and a spark of optimism. "You'd have to carefully plan that expedition, choose explorers who can handle the unknown, secure supplies for the journey, ensure we can come back if it fails, or settle someplace safer if it succeeds," she said. Talon imagined uncharted territories, perhaps mountainous regions less prone to the volcanic threat. Could they find uncontaminated water sources? Could they rebuild farmland under protective domes? The memory of roiling seas and noxious skies made it difficult to envision anything but storms and ash. Yet a faint hope flared in him. Eliana placed a hand on his shoulder. "Rest tonight," she said gently. "We'll need to be cautious, but I want you to think about my proposal. If we stay here, we might last a few years, maybe 5. But is that really living? Waiting for the day it all collapses?" He sighed, turning his gaze away from the window. "I'll think about it. For now, I'm relieved we at least secured a short reprieve." Their conversation ended, but his mind continued spinning with possibilities. He wandered back down to his bunk, the tower's steel lattice humming beneath his feet. Sleep came fitfully, dreams haunted by illusions of a grand exodus across cracked lands towards some distant promise. In the days that followed, the new bulbs were installed in the greenhouse, restoring the vibrancy that had been slowly draining away. Leaves unfurled in bright green clusters. Algae tanks bubbled healthily, and the tower's ration distribution improved just enough to elevate spirits. Yet no one was oblivious to the ticking clock of structural strain and the relentless onslaught of quakes. Weeks later, a particularly brutal storm battered the tower's exterior. The building groaned, vents rattled, and the greenhouse's glass canopy threatened to bow. People huddled in the lower levels until it passed, hearts pounding when an ominous crack splintered one of the observation windows. Teams patched it from inside, but the cracks remained like spiderweb scars. Meanwhile, the unstoppable tide of toxins showed no signs of receding. Finally, Eliana called a meeting of the tower's leaders, engineers, and explorers. She presented schematics for a mobile caravan powered by the same turbines that filtered their air. The concept involved repurposing some of the tower's systems into portable modules, so a small faction could journey inland. In the long term, she said, the rest of the tower population could follow, or we might ferry resources back. This could pave the way for a new colony. The proposal sparked immediate debate. Some insisted that abandoning the tower was suicidal, or, at best, a gamble too great to consider. Others saw it as an inevitable next step. The discussion lasted for hours, culminating with a reluctant agreement to invest in a scouting operation. A small band of explorers that would follow the proposed route, gather data, and return with findings. Talon, of course, was among the chosen. His expression held a quiet resolution as he scanned Eliana's notes. Emotions rippled in him. Fear, excitement, sorrow for leaving the place that had sheltered them, but the logic was clear. Staying was merely prolonging the inevitable. That evening he described the plan to Jonah, Halen, and Rena in the workshop. "It won't be easy," he warned. "We're forging into uncharted territory, hoping to outrun the volcanic belts. We'll face storms, contaminated rivers, who knows what else. But if we find a place less affected, or at least a route to such a place, it could mean a future for all of us." Jonah nodded slowly. "If we do nothing, we die here eventually. I'd rather meet fate out there, trying, than sit here waiting for the next quake to bury us." Halen filled nervously with a wrench, her eyes shining with determination. "Count me in," she said. "I'll help modify the vehicles." Rena gave a small, shaky smile. "I'm coming too. If there's any chance to find a life out there, I have to try." They clasped arms in solidarity. Each knew they might never see the tower again, or might return to find only rubble. Yet the chance for a new beginning propelled them forward. And so, the tower's final days began to look more like a chrysalis, from which a small team would break away, traveling into the unknown to seek out pockets of untainted land, hopeful that somewhere far from the raging seas and erupting undersea volcanoes, a new dawn could rise. Preparation started immediately, recalibrating suits, mapping routes, checking oxygen reserves. A mixture of fear and hope permeated the cramped corridors as onlookers whispered about the explorers' upcoming journey. On what would be the last morning Talon spent in the tower for a long time, perhaps forever, he stood once more in the observation chamber, gazing at the battered horizon. The greenish haze churned, Heavy with poisonous steam, the ocean remained a lethal, roiling mass, belching toxins from undersea chasms. No gulls flew across the sky now, no fishing boats dotted the waves. All that remained was the tower, a fragile fortress against an ever-evolving catastrophe. Yet for the first time in ages, he felt a surge of optimism. Life, after all, was about adaptation. Even trapped between decaying towers and poisoned seas, humanity's spirit lingered. The next chapter of their existence was uncertain, but a willingness to explore, to rebuild, to dream in the face of despair, that faith could carry them forward. So Talon closed his eyes, silently accepting the risk. Then, turning on his heel, he left the glass panel behind and descended into the heart of the tower to begin the journey toward whatever lay beyond the toxins, hoping that not all was lost to the poisonous waves.